Hello, welcome back to my channel. In today's video, I'm going to be talking about 10 popular romances that I love. I did this video last month where I talked about popular romances that I hate, can't stand, etc. I compiled those books for the most part, I believe, from this Goodreads list that was like the top 64 most popular romances of the past 3 years. And instead of talking at length about all 64 of those books, most of which I've already read and talked about before, I decided I would talk about the ones on that list that I just really don't like and don't understand the hype about. Today I'm going to be doing the opposite. Today I'm going to be talking about the books on that list, specifically that I really enjoyed and that I think do deserve the hype. I have talked about a lot of these books at length on my channel before, so this might feel like a little bit of a retread or a repeat. Apologies for that. I like sometimes talking about things that I like. Last time I did this, it felt really cathartic to talk about some books that were popular that I really hated, and today I think it's going to be really cathartic to talk about books that I love, because that's just the kind of mood that I'm in today. And I am going to try to articulate why I like these books, but you know, I'm giving myself a little bit more leeway. So the first book is The Soulmate Equation by Christina Lauren. I was kind of surprised to see this book on this list because while I do know that Christina Lauren is a popular author writing duo, while I do recognize that a lot of their books are books that people really enjoy, I feel like I never really heard a lot about this book after it came out. I knew a handful of people that had read it, mostly for the Goodreads Choice Awards that year, but not a lot of people just picked it up on a whim because maybe it didn't sound that interesting, or maybe it just got lost in the shuffle of all of the other popular romances coming out at the time. But I really liked this book. It's about Jess, who is a statistician and a single mom, and at the very beginning of the story I feel like we get really good backstory and insight into who she is as a character, which is not always the case with Christina Lauren books. I feel like that tends to be my main complaint with their stories, is that they feel a little bit flat when it comes to characters and the plots are not very well fleshed out. But I didn't find that to be the case with the story in either regard. Jess is a character who I find really likable. At the beginning of the story we get to know her a little bit and know kind of the people around her, her cast of characters. You know, obviously she's our main character, but who are her side characters, who are her sidekicks? She has a best friend who's really supportive. She has a daughter who is really quirky and charming and sweet. She has, I think, her grandparents maybe living in the same building as she does, amongst some other maybe older people who help to babysit her daughter. And so she has this like support system around her, but she's still feeling like, it'd be really cool if I could like maybe meet someone and maybe have someone there for me, though she is not really looking for a partner at the time. Till one day she is invited to try this app, and it is a DNA-based matchmaking service. So you submit your saliva, it comes back and is like, hey, of the people who have also submitted their saliva, there are DNA markers that we think mean you should be with this particular person. You have like a 99% chance of that person being your soulmate, or someone who is not only like genetically compatible with you, but has more than just like biological compatibility, if that makes sense. Like, not just, oh, our genes would probably work good together to have some good babies, but we are compatible on a deeper level. I don't know the actual science behind it, but I know that that's kind of how it's explained in the book, and I was just kind of instantly drawn in by that premise. It continued to be interesting throughout the entire book. I feel like they really went somewhere with this plot. It wasn't just something that was meant to draw you in, but wasn't really going to be fully fleshed out. It becomes a part of the plot as the story kind of carries on. And our hero is kind of that grumpy guy, typical hardworking dude. He is the founder of the application. His name is River, and whenever we get Jess's DNA sample back and it is like a 99% match to River, River's like, hey, would you fake date me for publicity for my app, and in return I will pay you. And since Jess is kind of in a tough spot trying to like make ends meet, says, okay, sure, I'll do this. And then the relationship kind of goes from there. The fake dating turns into real dating, turns into real feelings, etc. I just found it really charming. This is one of those books that I really don't have a lot of fleshed out bullet points about why I really enjoyed it. I think the characters here were charming, though maybe not the most developed characters I've ever read in a romance before. I thought the plot genuinely was interesting and fascinating, and I liked that the conflict that comes up was not so much a conflict that our two main characters caused, and was rather something that just kind of happened to affect their relationship. I don't know how to say it. It wasn't like they miscommunicated or something like that. Some external forces kind of act upon them as the conflict, which I thought was kind of fun. And there's just something about the ending of this book too that I distinctly remember swooning at, which surprised me because I wasn't totally sold with our hero up until that point. But that very last scene of him really redeeming himself, I don't know, it just really worked for me. And I wanted to mention this book again because I do think it's a Christina Lauren book that often gets overlooked, and it's one that I personally really enjoy and I would highly recommend picking up. I'm not saying this is going to be a life-changing romance, but I do think it's a really fun time, and this is one that I would definitely read in the summer. Speaking of summer, a book that I talk about way too much that I'm not going to wax poetic about because I talk about it in every other video. It Happened One Summer by Tessa Bailey. I'm not going to talk about the plot. It is a loose Schitt's Creek retelling. The reason I like this book so much I have reasons, and that's why I wanted to talk about it. Let me pull up the bullet points. Number one, we have a hero who accepts every facet of a heroine, even when some of her traits are not ones that are seen as highly desirable in a romantic partner. I love that. I think the hallmark of a good romance is when you have someone who is fully accepted for who they are, right? And I think that's like kind of the hope of every author, that they'll be able to accomplish that, but I find it's exceedingly rare in a romance, and specifically traditionally published romance. I don't know what it is. I think authors think that like some cheap banter is going to make me think two people should be together, but that's not what makes a good romance. A good romance is two people coming together and accepting each other, even the shitty parts of each other, and or loving the parts of each other that maybe other people wouldn't love. It's important. It is a hallmark of good romance, and It Happened One Summer happens to do that. In addition, we have a heroine who grows throughout the course of the story. Yes, she might be a little bit irritating and vapid at the beginning. I'm not saying all of those characteristics go away, but we do get to see her grow in a way that I think is very satisfying and feels really impactful. I'm realizing as I get older that even though I am getting older and have mostly figured myself out, I still really enjoy when we have characters who grow throughout the course of a story. I do think a romance is fun. I do think it can help you discover new things about yourself, but I do particularly like when our hero or heroine is actually growing and maturing throughout the course of the story. They're finding out new things about themselves. They're maybe diving headfirst into a new career or something like that. Honestly, a lot of the traditionally published romances that I read tend to neglect this aspect, or they dive too heavy into things that are happening around our characters, like, oh, she's getting treated shitty at her job. I don't care so much about that. I care about her growth as an actual individual, maybe at her job, instead of all of the like external factors that are going on. I don't know. I just really like this book because I liked seeing Piper grow throughout the story. I also really liked that the side characters were super, super charming. I find that side characters can kind of make or break a story. I think that was definitely the case when I read Book Lovers by Emily Henry. That one didn't work for me because I hated the side characters. Oops, sorry. But this book, I enjoyed the side characters, and I felt like there was enough balance there, right? Some side character stuff, but like mostly it was about our couple. And then lastly, I really thought the hot sex scenes were hot sex scenes. It's kind of a big component of a romance. If you can't buy into the sexual relationship, that's kind of a problem, right? That wasn't a problem in this book, so that's why I like this book. There's a lot of other reasons, I'm sure. Those are the ones that instantly came to mind. So moving on to a book by an author who I just kind of mentioned, People We Meet on Vacation by Emily Henry. This is a book that I've talked about again at length on my channel, but I don't think I've really talked specifically about what details of this story really work for me, and I think I want to talk about them, so I'm going to talk about them right now. Okay, first up, Friends to Lovers fucking excellence. I just think Friends to Lovers is underrated. I know some people hate it, think it's boring, whatever, and I think my sister specifically didn't like this book because it's Friends to Lovers and she thought that was boring. I think Friends to Lovers is so underrated because I think it is an endless well of mutual pining potential. You have two people who've been friends for a long time, they know each other, and over time their feelings develop into something more. I don't know what is unappealing about that. To me, that is like the ultimate delight. Maybe it's because I never had any like male friends for the most part growing up. I mean, like here and there, but I didn't really like have any male besties. The ideal of that is just so romanticized in my head. The idea of like having a guy who's like hot, who you're friends with, who eventually just grows to like really have deep feelings for you. That's delightful. That is delightful. That's what I want in a romance, and I liked this. I liked how angsty it was too. I'm so drawn to an angsty romance, and I have it in my notes here to ask y'all for angsty romance recommendations because I don't feel like I get enough of those in my everyday reading. I read so much traditionally published romance against my better judgment, and I don't feel like it ever really brings the angst in the way that I want. This book did, which I appreciate, but most books like very low stakes, very low angst. I like drama. I like mess. I want some angst in my romance, and I want just feel the tension between these two, right? And I did. I feel like I felt that in People We Meet on Vacation. It is something that I look for. It is something that growing up I really liked in TV shows and fan fiction, and I still like it today as an adult person. So that is there. And then I also really like that this book is loosely based on When Harry Met Sally, which arguably is one of the best rom-coms of all time. I just feel like, why can't more rom-coms be like this? Why can we not have more time with our two main characters spending time together and falling in love and being best friends? I don't know. I feel like this book does it good. I feel like the movie does it good. I feel like you should pick it up if you haven't picked it up already. If you needed any convincing, hopefully that convinced you. A book that I only really talked about once on my channel, and I sort of regret, is All Roads Lead Here by Mariana Zapata. So this book is about our main character, Aurora, and at the start of the story, she is on a mission to hike some of the hikes that her mom used to hike. How many times can I say hike? Her mother went missing quite a few years ago, and Aurora is hoping to reconnect with her mother by going on some of these hikes, and she's also had a recent breakup that is sort of having her rethink a lot of things in her life. She is going through a sort of tumultuous period, trying to kind of figure out what she wants, and she thinks thinks the best way to do that is to go to, I believe, Colorado and sort of like figure things out. She has rented a small house or like a garage apartment from a guy for a really good deal, and she's gonna go stay there and hike some hikes around where she used to live, where she kind of like lived for a few years with her mom. And in the process of doing this, the garage apartment she's renting kind of gets erroneously rented out to her, mistakenly rented out to her, and she has to deal with the owner, the rightful owner of this garage apartment, named Rhodes. Rhodes is kind of a grumpy park ranger, I believe, and it's their romance. It's Aurora and Rhodes' romance, and it's a little bit of an age gap thing, as most of Mariana Zapata's books are. So let's talk about what I like about this book. First up, we have that signature slow burn Mariana Zapata thing. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, but I feel like in this story, it was the appropriate amount of slow burn. We get to see the characters really fall for each other over time, soften to each other even before anything romantic happens, and then once romance is slowly introduced, we do get a little bit of smuttiness. I think more smuttiness in this book than we get in a lot of her books, and I didn't feel like this was a painful slow burn. I felt like it was appropriate and I really enjoyed it. It's a book that I would recommend to someone who might be new to romance and is generally interested in the plot of this book. Next up, we have a protective hero. I loved Rhodes, and I loved how much attention to detail he had when it came to helping Aurora, who was obviously a very inexperienced hiker and had really no idea what she was doing. He didn't try to belittle her or make her feel bad. He didn't try to like take over for her, but he did help teach her a lot of things, which I really liked. And I appreciated that while he was grumpy, he wasn't a total dick. I feel like a lot of authors tend to get those things confused just because a guy is grumpy or a hero or a heroine. Even if a heroine's grumpy. I don't need someone to be a dick. They don't need to be an asshole for literally no reason to the people around them. It's not endearing, it's not cute, and it's not someone I personally would want to fall in bed with. So I liked this guy because he had reasons to be very protective of the people around him and to be a little bit grumpy, but he never really was a total dick, which is nice because that is, again, in contrast to some previous Mariana Zapata books that just didn't work for me, especially her past couple of releases, but this one did. Next up, kind of similar to some of the other books I've talked about, we have a heroine who kind of finds herself throughout the story and kind of makes peace with other things in her life, and I felt like it was appropriate for those things to happen before she really fully fell for Rhodes. And then two things that I wasn't expecting from this book. There was a lot of emphasis on non-traditional family structures, and I really appreciated that. It really went along with this idea of found family that I think was heavily prevalent throughout the book, and I also really liked the discussions of mental health. A decent amount of talk about mental health, and I was actually surprised at how well it was handled, given the way that some things have historically not been like very well handled in Mariana Zapata books. So anyway, I liked this book. I recommend it. I thought it was cute, and if you're looking for a good slow burn, pick it up. Next up, we have The Bride Test by Helen Huang. This book is about Kai and Esme, and at the start of the story, Esme is asked to come to the United States by Kai's mom because she thinks that Kai needs to finally get married. Now, Kai, on the other hand, doesn't think he has any emotions, doesn't think he is capable necessarily of truly falling into a deep romantic love with anyone, and so it's going to be Esme's mission to convince Kai basically that he can love someone, and in return, hopefully Esme will get to stay in the United States and or bring over some of her family members. So she's definitely on a mission. Now, there was a lot to like here, but I think what I enjoyed the most about this book and why I always bring this one up if it is, able to be brought up is because it is so unique compared to a lot of the romances that I have read in the past. I think the non-traditional setup, I think the inclusion of culture is just delightful. I think we're getting slightly better at including more diverse characters and more diverse backgrounds in romance, and that's particularly why I do still pick up traditionally published romance, is because I appreciate that I'm getting something there that I'm not getting in most indie published romance. But the non-traditional setup I thought was something that really aided in the story and created something just wholly unique. I really, really adored this story. I think kind of going along with that as well, I think this book really does a masterful job at balancing like lightheartedness and sort of like a rom-com feel with some kind of like darker or heavier or more emotional topics. And I point that out because I talked about how much I disliked the third book in this series, simply because I felt like it was a little bit too dark to be considered a rom-com. While it's an important book, I didn't love that one. This one is, in my opinion, equally as important, but it does masterfully handle those two sort of juxtaposed ideas of like lightheartedness, bright love, and then also dealing with some of the harder aspects of life. I just love the story. It always will mean a lot to me. I love also the autism rep as a fellow Divergent. It spoke to me in a lot of ways, and I also just found the romance swoony and sweet. I remember crying reading this book, which pretty much never happens to me, so if you haven't picked it up yet, you really, really need to. Next up, we have a book that I'm sure people are going to sound off in the comments about how much they dislike it, and I get it, but I really liked The Love Hypothesis by Ali Hazelwood. This book is a Kylo fanfic. Raylo fanfiction. Sorry, I'm not a Star Wars girl, so that didn't really appeal to me in any sense. This book is about Olive and Adam. Olive is a PhD candidate. Adam is a PhD not candidate. He has his PhD. owner of a PhD, and she doesn't work in his lab particularly, but after some like, you know, tropey bullshit happens, they end up having to kind of fake date and work together-ish. Not really work together, but, you know, use each other to be mutually beneficial in a fake dating sense. And it was fun. It was a whole lot of fun. Was this the best romance I've ever read? Probably not. Is this the sexiest, steamiest, swooniest book I've ever read? Also no. But I think that this book accomplished what it set out to accomplish, and I think it was a fun time, to be honest. What I liked most about this book is the thing that I think a lot of people either really hate or really love. It's the tropes. I love a good fanfiction trope that is over the top, and this book really delivered time and again. We have the there's only one bed trope. We have, oh my god, there's no chair, I have to sit on your lap. Fake dating. We have kind of a mistaken identity situation. We have the guy who's been pining for the girl for like years and years. There's just so much here to like and to enjoy, and I think if you sort of suspend your disbelief and you just go into this looking for a good time, you're gonna find it. I think you're gonna find a good time. Now, I think we can debate the physics of whether or not one can fit an entire breast in one's mouth, but beyond that, I found this book pretty sexy, pretty fun. I liked the realistic sex scenes that were included in this book, mostly realistic sex scenes that were included in this book, and I also just appreciated the vulnerability on the parts of both of our characters, because by the end of the book I was like, yeah, y'all belong together. This is great. This is good stuff. Was it cringe at times? Sure, but I don't really care. Next up, a book that is very tonally different. We have Regretting You by Colleen Hoover. I always feel weird putting Colleen Hoover books on lists like this because I just don't love Colleen Hoover books typically, but this one just really did something for me. It's about Morgan and Clara. Morgan ends up having her daughter, I want to say like 16 or 17, with her high school sweetheart. This happens at sort of like a weird time in Morgan's life because the guy that she's with, she doesn't really want to be with. She wants to be with his best friend instead. But given the fact that she is pregnant with her boyfriend's baby, she never gets to explore her feelings for this other guy, right? Now flash forward to the future, and we have some upset in the family. We have Morgan's husband, former boyfriend, now husband, pass away in a car accident with Morgan's best friend and sister. Best friend and sister, I believe. She's having to navigate life now without her husband and also with a teenage daughter who is dealing with a lot of big emotions, clearly. This book was so good. We get to see Morgan obviously explore not only her feelings for her like childhood crush who she never got to really like, you know, explore. We also get to see Clara make some mistakes. And we also get to see some messy ass family drama, which is exactly what I want. I love messy family drama. I like secrets that end up not really having answers. I like mutual pining. I love mutual pining. Mutual pining makes the world go round. I need more of it in my life. God damn it. If you have recommendations, not only for angsty books, but also for mutual pining books, please put them in the comments down below because I need them. I need them in my life desperately. This book I just think handled so many things in such an interesting way. I think that the moral questions that this book asked were ones that I could maybe not relate to, but could appreciate. I think that can be the yes or no for me on whether or not I like a Colleen Hoover book based on, do I appreciate the moral question that's being asked, and or do I agree with the stance that Colleen is taking? In the case of, let's say November 9, a fuck no. But in this book, I did actually enjoy the kind of like moral questions raised, and I really enjoyed seeing Morgan kind of go on this journey too after her husband died to kind of figure out who she was without him. Now, I think she was a stay-at-home mom for the majority of the story, and I think she went back to school in this book and she got to kind of figure her stuff out, and I think it raised very interesting questions. As a person without children, I don't think I can speak very clearly on my opinions on motherhood and what the right thing to do or the wrong thing to do is, but I just think it was really cool to see someone who really embraced, you know, being a stay-at-home mom, but also really wanted to kind of go after her goals and her dreams. I thought it was like a best of both worlds sort of situation, and it just spoke to me in a way that I really appreciated. So I liked this book. I recommend it. If you like some angst, you like some tension, you like some Colleen Hoover, pick it up. All right, moving on to the last 3 books. I've been ranting for a while, I feel like. We have Act Your Age, Eve Brown, another delightful entry on this list. Again, I could just gush all day about these books. This book is about Eve and Jacob. At the start of the story, Eve is basically threatened that her trust fund will be taken away unless she holds down a job for 6 months, because she's kind of flighty, she's kind of flaky, and none of her business adventures and endeavors have really taken off. Ends up kind of getting into the situation where she convinces a guy named Jacob, the owner or manager, I guess you could say, of this inn. She is a chef and that she can be the chef of this inn. And she does have culinary experience. She's not completely lying about that, but she wasn't really looking for a job whenever she comes by. And it is a Grumpy Sunshine romance with 2 autistic main characters. So what did I like about this book? I think the first thing that surprised me that I enjoyed about this book was our heroine. I didn't expect to like her because flighty, flaky, inconsistent characters tend to really grind my gears. But there was something so endearing about Eve and her motivations that I was willing to overlook her flightiness and flakiness. I also liked, again, that she developed over the course of the story, and while she still had this carefree naivety nature, and while she still was the same person at the end of the story that she was in the beginning of the story, you definitely see her growth as the story goes on. I also really liked, again, Grumpy Sunshine done right. We have Jacob, who is our grumpy hero, and he definitely has reasons to be grumpy. He is the way he is, and he is stuck in his ways. And I like that Eve kind of gets him out of his shell, but he's never a true dick to Eve, and Eve is also able to kind of fight it at the same time. There's a couple of things that kind of bug me about the Grumpy Sunshine trope, or at least they have been recently. One is when the guy is too much of an asshole, or the grumpy person in the dynamic is too much of an asshole. But also, I don't like when the heroine and or the Sunshine character isn't able to kind of like dish it back when the dude's being a dick. Eve does a great job with that. I appreciate it. I love it. I don't think it's nice when the characters are unevenly yoked. There were two even yokes here. And then lastly, sex scenes that made me blush, which is a rare feat in my opinion. Sex scenes usually either make me cringe or they're boring or I skip through them, whatever. These ones I didn't want to do any of that. I just giggled and blushed and had a great time. So love this book, highly recommend it. Next up is a book that I have a hard time describing, 7 Days in June by Tia Williams. This book is a book that I definitely wouldn't have picked up had it not been for a list video, but I'm so glad I did because this book is, again, everything that I love in a romance. It's about our two main characters, Eva and Shane, and they had this sort of whirlwind romance as teenagers or young adults. They were together for about a week until some sort of circumstances happen to separate them, and this creates a lot of built-up resentment, I guess you could say, between the characters. There's a bit of a misunderstanding when they first break up, and then they come back together years later after they're put in another sort of like happenstance situation. I love the exploration of so many things in this book. First off, not an exploration thing, but I just really loved the daughter of Eva in the story, Ava. She was fun. While she definitely didn't have the vocabulary of a traditional 11-year-old, typical 11-year-old, she definitely felt a little bit too old for the age that they said that she was. I really liked her. I thought she was fun, and it was a great addition to the story, and I think brought these two characters together in a really fun way. But I just feel like the story explored mental health in a really important and impactful way. I liked that our characters grew together, and then grew apart, and then grew together again. I liked that both people went to therapy, they worked on their shit, and they found productive ways to be together. And I just love the whole mutual pining thing. God damn it, I just think it's fun. This is another story that is very angsty, very tension-filled. It's the kind of story that feels like a kind of a sweeping saga, and I think if you're a fan of like literary fiction type of story, this might be a romance that you connect with more than something that's a little bit more smutty, like It Happened One Summer. Also, if you're someone who enjoys the thought of public acts, there is a scene in this book that happens, and I enjoyed it. And then our last book, a book that I don't think I've really talked about very much since initially reading it, and it is Spoiler Alert by Olivia Dade. This is a book that I gave 5 stars to, but for some reason just kind of forgot about. So let's talk about it and talk about what I liked about it. This story is about Marcus and April, and the premise is kind of hard to fully sum up, but Marcus is an actor on a TV show, and he's not really liking the direction that the TV show is going in. He writes fanfic as kind of a cathartic release of his emotions and his feelings, and in doing so, he meets someone online who is named April in real life. And April also writes fan fiction. April is also trying to kind of switch up things in her life and become a more confident individual, so she decides she's going to post pictures of her own cosplay online. Now, she's a little bit worried about trolls because she is plus sized and she is going outside of her comfort zone, and unfortunately the reaction to her cosplay is sort of a mixed bag. A lot of people like it, but there are some detractors, and when this picture kind of falls into the hands of trolls, we have Marcus and his real world sort of like persona as an actor saying, "Hey, April, will you go out with me?" Neither April nor Marcus knows they are friends online, but Marcus invites her on a date. They go on a date. It's sort of ill-fated, but they end up kind of falling for each other over the course of the story, and the identities are revealed eventually. Now, I know what you're gonna say, but Chandler, don't you hate hidden identity stories? And you would be correct, mostly. Here's the thing. I am a complex individual. Everybody is a complex individual. You can hate some aspects of one thing and love aspects of that same thing. Now, let me try at least to describe what it is I like and don't like about this whole hidden identity thing. I like a hidden identity story when we have people who have known each other for a really long time in one context and meet in a different context. Sort of hidden identities that I do not enjoy are when people are meeting for the first time and one of those people is being dishonest about their identity. That, to me, is not the basis of a healthy relationship because you're withholding a lot of yourself, whereas you, in my opinion, are learning multiple different aspects and facets of an individual when you know them in 2 different ways, basically. Obviously, some things are being withheld, and I don't think dishonesty is like great always, But in this circumstance, I can be okay with it. Does that make sense? Like Pump 57 has this thing, Courtney Milan book that I really, really like that does this as well. And spoiler alert does it. So anyway, I'm gonna stop justifying it. I liked the hidden identity in this story. Now, what I like about this book is pretty easy to define, and it's something that I, again, don't feel like I see done enough in romance, and it is true emotional vulnerability. Olivia Day does such a good job at writing characters who have really hard things in their life and really tough emotions that they're working through that make them as characters feel like real people. Marcus and his career as an actor is something that really affects him and affects the people around him. He has a really complicated relationship with his parents. Instead of being just really proud of him and proud of what he does, they sort of shit on him and call him vapid for having this job. You know, they think he should have a different job instead. And he has to work through the kind of complex emotions in that way. And he also has to work through his relationship with his parents because it's not as easy as just telling your parents off for being assholes. I just love the way Olivia Day handles things in such a realistic way. And it's something that I feel like is not done enough in stories. Kind of an aside, I guess, because I'm here and this is my video and I can do an aside, right? Something that I would personally like to do if and when I write a romance is to include more family relationships and family dynamics that are complicated and a touch confusing, because I feel like a lot of us face that, and I think that can affect a lot of our romantic relationships. But it feels like a lot of the parental sort of relationships that I see in stories tend to be very one-dimensional and one note. It's like, oh, poor little rich girl whose family doesn't really care about her, which I feel like happens pretty often in indie romance. Or we have, you know, the guy from a small town who has to go back and take care of his family. And I'm not saying these things don't happen in real life, but I do feel like there is more nuance typically in relationships than is explored in a romance, and I want to see more of that. And I feel like Olivia Day does a pretty good job at that. So that and the fact that this romance was pretty swoony, it all worked together. It was something I enjoyed, and I feel like the plot was pretty unique, which I can always appreciate. So that is it. Those are the 10 popular romances that I actually kind of love. It was fun doing this. I got to just talk about things and tropes and books that I like, and I hope that maybe this told you a little bit more about my romance taste. I feel like my taste isn't that hard to understand, is it? I don't know, but I still think it's fun to talk about these things, and hopefully this gave you an idea so that maybe when you are trying to compare your taste with my taste, you have a better understanding of what I like and what you like. Again, in the comments down below, tell me what books you have for me that have really good angsty mutual pining or tension. I'd appreciate it. Thanks so much for watching. I love you all so much, and until next time.